friend of mine, a Catholic priest chaplain, Father Ed Erpelding, often shared with us that, in his opinion, often a physical crisis or a medical crisis can also be a crisis of faith. There are various ways to think about how the crisis that we're going through physically or medically impacts our hearts, our minds, and our spirits. And so we consider three phases of spiritual growth. The first phase, phase one, is God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life. Two of my children this week are at a faith-based sports camp. I'll be disappointed if at some point they don't hear that message. That's what we expect to be shared with our children. God loves you and has wonderful plans for your life. The emphasis in phase one of our spiritual life often is plans. God has plans for us. That theme verse often is Jeremiah 29:11. God says, I know the plans I have for you, good plans to prosper you, to help you, to give you a future and a hope. So that's phase one. God loves you and has wonderful plans for your life. Phase two of our spiritual lives often is God will help me overcome the obstacles I face. And so as we move through life, we always, of course, encounter difficulties, obstacles, and struggles. And in that phase, God's help instead of God's plans becomes the major theme. And so Romans chapter 8 says, we are more than conquerors through him who loves us. And so we focus on God helping us through our difficulties in phase two. Right now, I have a teenager at home who is right after surgery. He's had a sports injury and he's overcoming that obstacle right now. He's very much in this phase two, where God is going to help him overcome his struggles and his difficulties. In my opinion, much of our life is spent in phase two. We know God had plans for us, but now we're facing difficulties and struggles, and God is helping us to overcome those. The phase that we, of course, spend the least time thinking about is phase three. After I've thought about God's plans for me, after God's helped me and I've found the help I need to overcome difficulties and struggles, what about that stage where I'm not going to overcome anymore? For us in our lives, our first pregnancy ended in miscarriage. After the pregnancy is over, we can't stay in phase two. God's going to help us overcome. The pregnancy's already ended. Our baby had died at that point. And so the question isn't how is God going to have plans for our lives like phase one. It's not the question of how is God going to help us overcome, because the matter in that situation is already closed. Phase three is when God brings meaning in the midst of suffering. So the theme here is from Ecclesiastes, where the writer says everything is meaningless, but then he comes around at the end and he says God has made everything beautiful in its time. So we may not understand why we suffer, but in the midst of that suffering, God can bring meaning out of that suffering. So we often, of course, move in and out of these phases, and you can actually be in more than one of these phases at a time. But the thing of it is, many of us want to avoid phase three, understandably, at all costs. And whenever we can avoid phase three, it's something I would recommend. But sometimes you're not going to overcome that obstacle anymore. You can see the handwriting on the wall that struggle is something you're not going to be able to press through in the way you had hoped. But it's not over at that point. God can bring meaning, can really manifest some amazing things, and we get to see that here at the hospital every day. So yes, physical crises, medical crises can be a crisis of faith, but it also can lead us to profound meaning to be found in the midst of that suffering.